In The Origin of Species, Darwin provided abundant evidence that life on Earth has evolved over time, and he proposed natural selection as the primary mechanism for that change. He observed that individuals differ in their inherited traits and that selection acts on such differences, leading to evolutionary change. Although Darwin realized that variation in heritable traits is a prerequisite for evolution, he did not know precisely how organisms pass heritable traits to their offspring. Just a few years after Darwin published The Origin of Species, Gregor Mendel wrote a groundbreaking paper on inheritance in pea plants. In that paper, Mendel proposed a model of inheritance in which organisms transmit discrete heritable units, now called genes, to their offspring. Although Darwin did not know about genes, Mendel's paper set the stage for understanding the genetic differences on which evolution is based. David Olivia Garcia is a co-host of New Mexico in Focus and is also the managing editor for the New Mexico Independent, which is an online news website. He says that the internet has some great benefits for journalism. The internet is this new, amazing medium. Not so new, it's been around quite some time now. But it's maturing as, among other things, a place for journalism. In a sense, the internet allows you to tell stories better than in a newspaper or on television. For this reason, you can do it all online. You can have the written word, you can have still photographs, you can have video. You can link and kind of connect to the other journalism that has been done on a given topic. So it's not like you're in a vacuum. The internet has had a negative impact on these papers. However, John Fleck, who is a columnist for the Albuquerque Journal and also has his own blog, says that he doesn't think that's entirely the case. Fish are important because they help maintain the health of marine ecosystems and provide support to other marine life. They are an important part of the food web because they are predators to smaller organisms and prey to marine mammals and seabirds globally. They also support humans. About 80 million tons of fish are harvested annually. This volume is enough to feed all Filipinos with their annual fish consumption for 20 years. And there are currently about 60 million people working in the fishing industry globally. But on a global scale, 33% of fisheries are overfished, meaning too many fish are being harvested. This may cause fish populations to become depleted and not able to recover. 67% are fully exploited, meaning additional fishing effort could lead to the fisheries collapse. Only 10% have room to grow, with just 10% of the fisheries having a room to grow. We might experience a global fishing crisis. So, in the seller's market, what marketing tends to be is what we call product-focused market. You have the product. If the customers want it, they're going to come to you. In that case, you should develop that product to the best of your ability. You should innovate in that product, you should try to reduce cost, and you should really focus on the product. Your business objective in a product-focused market is to sell as much as you can, and profitability from a product-focused market is going to come from volume. Selling as much as you can. In the past, when we've studied product-focused market, we've shown that profitability is tied to market share. So market share becomes your business objective. And why does market share increase profitability? Because the bigger your market share, the more your revenues. And the bigger your market share, and your volume, the lower the product cost and hence profitability. Higher revenues, lower cost, more profit. That's really the goal of a product-focused market, and when you're product-focused, where do you get growth? Will you develop new products based on your product experience, or you go to new markets? That's product-focused marketing. Okay. Another ancient Greek philosopher we need to discuss is Aristotle, Aristotle's ethical theory. What Aristotle's ethical theory is all about is this: he's trying to show you how to be happy, what true happiness is. Now, why is he interested in human happiness? It's not just because it's something that all people want to aim for. It's more than that. But to get there we need to first make a very important distinction. Let me introduce a couple of technical terms: extrinsic value and intrinsic value. To understand Aristotle's interest in happiness, you need to understand this distinction. Some things we aim for and value, not for themselves, but for what they bring about in addition to themselves. If I value something as means to something else, then it has what we will call extrinsic value, other things we desire and hold to be valuable for themselves alone. If we value something not as means to something else, but for its own sake, let us say that it has intrinsic value, exercise. There may be some people who value exercise for itself, but I don't. I value exercise because if I exercise, I tend to stay healthier than I would if I didn't. So I desire to engage in exercise, and I value exercise extrinsically, not for its own sake, but as a means to something beyond it. It brings me good health. For many, these have been vital considerations for the future of artificial intelligence. But British computer scientist Alan Turing decided to disregard all these questions in favor of a much simpler one: can a computer talk like a human? This question led to an idea for measuring artificial intelligence that would famously come to be known as the Turing Test. In the 1950 paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, Turing proposed the following game. A human judge has a text conversation with unseen players and evaluates their responses. To pass the test, a computer must be able to replace one of the players without substantially changing the results. In other words, a computer would be considered intelligent if its conversation couldn't be easily distinguished from a human's. Turing predicted that by the year 2000, machines with 100 megabytes of memory would be able to easily pass his test. But he may have jumped the gun. In recent decades, journalism has been faced with challenges. So, what has happened to journalism? The rise of the internet has a great impact on journalism, specifically the ways it is produced and consumed. Because the internet democratizes people, ordinary people can get involved in journalism. It takes steps for people to feel enthusiastic about the changes in journalism. The internet not only speeds up spread of news, but also helps people gain information in various ways. Thus, journalism now becomes a collaborative process in an imaginary way, which is unexpected. For example, even small pieces of ordinary video can be of a new type of journalism. So the topic for today is abstraction. And this is a very important layer of computer, because you can't do anything with a computer unless you have a symbolic system in place. Right. So we're talking about the origin of symbolic systems. Language is a classic symbolic system. Apparently, one theory for why language evolved is that people communicated with sign language and with movement quite well for a long time. And it turned out that they wanted to communicate even while they were doing things. So, while they were trying to strangle the dinosaur, not the dinosaurs, the rhinoceros, they wanted to say, "Come help me," and they used sign language to do it. They had to let go of the rhinoceros, and the rhinoceros ran away. So you can see that it's a good idea to be able to do something with your hands, and be able to communicate at the same time. Hence there come words and languages. Around the world, renewable energy use is on the rise, and these alternative energy sources could hold the key to combating climate change. What is renewable energy? Renewable energy is generated from sources that naturally replenish themselves and never run out. The most common sources are solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, and biomass. Over 80% of the total energy consumed by humans is derived from fossil fuels. However, renewables are the fastest-growing source of energy in the world. Renewable energy has many benefits. First, it can combat climate change because it creates no direct greenhouse gas emissions. The only emissions that they produce are indirect, meaning those that result from manufacturing parts, installation, operation, and maintenance. But even those are minimal. An essay is a chance to identify your read and learned. As a writer, you first need to collect many materials, then write an essay in 4 or 5 paragraphs, structures, and quotes. If someone is searching for a book or article to read, he or she will decide from the very beginning whether this work is worth attention. If you want to wow your teacher, polish the introduction, especially the first couple of sentences. Add an essay hook, something interesting, funny, shocking, or intriguing to win the reader's attention. Build an emotional connection with your reader right from the start. A hook in the essay is a catchy sentence or paragraph in the impressive introduction which serves as an attention element and an important part. An excellent hook sentence is engaging and interesting. It is a perfect method to start an argumentative or persuasive essay. The hook for your essay often appears in the first sentence. The opening paragraph includes a thesis sentence. Some popular hook choices can include using an interesting quote, a little-known fact, famous last words, or a statistic. The Internet, the most powerful tool in terms of engineering made by humans, has the most complicated structure. What we call the Internet is made up of a lot of things: wires traversing the ocean, satellites and cell phone towers, massive data centers sending packets of information all over, and devices. The Internet can be connected via a modem or an ADSL switch center to a local landline telephone exchange network. It can connect us from Sydney to Melbourne and then to the US. However, it takes energy for the transmission system to transmit information. For example, the longer email you write, the more energy is consumed. Meanwhile, there are more than 30 billion things connected to the Internet, like cell phones, laptops, credit card readers, smart TV, and each of them requires electricity. In total, Internet-connected devices probably use around 5% of the world's electricity. And most of the electricity comes from burning fossil fuels, which release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Approach and avoidance motivation is composed of 3 conceptually distinct components. Approach indicates a propensity to move toward, or maintain contact with, a desired stimulus, such as vocational plans. Avoidance indicates a propensity to move away from, or maintain distance from, an undesired stimulus in order to reduce anxiety. Motivation is defined as the energization and direction of behavior. The valence of stimuli is at the core of the distinction between approach and avoidance, with positively veloced stimuli typically leading to approach and negatively veloced stimuli typically leading to avoidance. Stimuli can be external or internal, implicit or explicit, conscious or non-conscious. My lab works on the applications of synthetic biology, so we're very interested in doing useful things with biological systems. Up to now, life has evolved, and now we actually have the ability and the power to engineer it, to design it. And so I'm curious about what the natural world is going to look like in the future. So synthetic biology is sort of the next level of genetic engineering. So about 40 years ago, we being scientists and engineers, developed techniques to basically move pieces of DNA from one organism to another, and this was sort of done by physically cutting and pasting. Now we're moving beyond that where we can write DNA, so we're no longer limited to the pieces. We can cut from one and put in another. We can chemically synthesize this DNA on a machine and put that into an organism. And now we can even create new organisms, completely from scratch. So if you imagine a cell that's programmed to make a useful compound, say, material or drug, then what you have is basically a microscale manufacturing unit. It's basically a cellular factory. And the cool thing about cellular factory is that when you want more factories, you let that cell grow and divide. So in the lab, if we have one bacteria, we put it in a flask. The next day we come in. We have millions, if not billions of bacteria. We are from an organization called NonHuman Rights Project, and we fight for legal rights of non-human animals. Drawing a line in order to enslave an autonomous and self-determining being is a violation of equality. We then searched through 80 jurisdictions. We chose the state of New York. Then we decided upon who our plaintiffs are going to be. We decided upon chimpanzees. We know the extraordinary cognitive capabilities that they have, and they also resemble the kind that human beings have. And so we chose chimpanzees, and we began to then canvass the world to find the experts in chimpanzee cognition. So now we needed to find our chimpanzee. Our chimpanzee, first we found 2 of them in the state of New York. Both of them would die before we could even get our suits filed. Then we found Tommy. Tommy is a chimpanzee. Tommy was a chimpanzee. We found him in that cage. We found him in a small room that was filled with cages in a larger warehouse structure on a used trailer lot in central New York. And so on the last week of December 2013, the Non-Human Rights Project filed 3 suits all across the state of New York using the same common law argument. The court didn't approve our appeal because they think chimpanzees are not humans even though they have cognitive skills. We proved to the court that chimpanzees also have cognitive capabilities, and they were not hearing us. We have a long history to research on hospital design and patient recovery. A long time ago, people began to study therapeutic environments. For example, in 1855, Florence Nightingale recognized that color and form enhanced a patient's recovery. They found that fresh air and sunlight had positive impacts, and architecture also played as an important part. Views of the hospital's backyards can help patients rest well and sleep fast, and can also help relieve their stress and pain easily, because of the pleasant feelings caused by nature. Being visited by friends or family members can help patients be better off sooner, as well as living alone in a single room. 90% of patients and nurses in hospitals agree that the well-designed hospital environment links to recovery rates. Because of the economic model, the newspaper industry has been shrinking drastically from the last 50 years of the 20th century in some states of America. Also, as the economic model changed, newspapers increased the cash flow. However, there are still some newspaper industries losing money because of a decrease in advertising and buyers. They can't find buyers. Only a few newspapers have positive cash flow. Over 100 newspapers with cash flow in red had no money to publish the newspaper every day. Some of them published 3 days per week. Small-sized newspapers only published once a week and had to go online. Some newspapers even disappeared. The staff working in newspaper industry decreased by 30 to 60% or more. Transportation officials, advocates, companies, and users around the world are talking about how automated vehicles will change transportation as we know it. Autonomous vehicles are split into 6 levels of automation as defined by the Society of Automotive Engineers. 0. No automation. 1. Driver assistance. 2. Partial automation. 3. Conditional automation. 4. High automation. And 5. Full automation. Humans are responsible for monitoring the vehicle and performing most functions in levels 1 and 2, while an automated driving system performs all functions in levels 3, 4, and 5. Vehicles in levels 3 and up are considered highly automated vehicles. As vehicles progress to higher levels of automation, less responsibility is put on the driver for monitoring the vehicle. Here's how an automated vehicle works. Several systems work in conjunction with each other to control an automated vehicle. Radar sensors dotted around the car monitor the position of vehicles nearby. Video cameras detect traffic lights, read road signs, and keep track of other vehicles while also looking out for pedestrians and other obstacles. I suppose you wouldn't expect perhaps to find a mathematician in a museum of historical objects, but actually, the objects that I've been drawn to in this museum have quite a lot of mathematical significance. These Neolithic stones, discovered in Scotland, dating back 5,000 years, are probably the first examples of humans exploring the concept of symmetry. And that's what I do as a practicing mathematician. I spend my life trying to understand what symmetries are possible in nature and in mathematics and abstractly. And here I've got a connection, going back 5,000 years, to people who are already trying to understand, how can I arrange patches on the side of these stone balls in a symmetrical manner? One of the intriguing things about these stones is that we don't actually know what they're for. They might have been for divination, trying to predict the future. They might have been part of a game. They look very much like dice, but we don't really think there is any game associated with them. Maybe they were just for checking around, they're very nice in the hand when you hold them. Or maybe they were symbols of power in the clan. I suppose that's why I like them, because we don't really know what they are. This is a new memory learning memory. It is a good thing for you to get enough sleep, and a bad thing for you if not. People need to sleep before learning, and people also need to sleep after learning. When you are asleep, the memory can consolidate all the information into your brain. From this point, it may only get worse. Not only will I tell you about the wonderfully good things that happen when you get sleep, but the alarmingly bad things that happen when you don't get enough both for your brain and your body. Let me start with the brain and the functions of learning and memory, because what we've discovered over the past 10 or so years is that you need sleep after learning to essentially hit the save button on those new memories so that you don't forget. But recently, we discovered that you also need sleep before learning and now to actually prepare your brain almost like a dry sponge, ready to initially soak up new information. And without sleep, the memory circuits of the brain essentially become waterlogged, as it were. And you can't absorb new memories. Honeybees do a waggle dance to direct other bees to sources of nectar, but dancing bees like this one can be halted by a headbutt from another bee. Now, researchers have found that this headbutt is actually a warning signal. A feeding station was set up in the lab to mimic a source of nectar. Then foraging bees were introduced to dangers at the station, such as competition from rival colonies. When foragers returned to the hive, they stopped bees dancing. Scientists think the behavior warns dancers of a dangerous source of nectar. Social skills are vital in enabling an individual to have and maintain positive interactions with others. Many of these skills are crucial in making and sustaining friendships. Social interactions do not always run smoothly, and an individual needs to be able to implement appropriate strategies, such as conflict resolution when difficulties and interactions arise. It is also important for individuals to have empathy, as it allows them to respond in an understanding and caring way to how others are feeling. Children are facing social difficulties, with particular risks. Young people who do not have strong relationships with the adults in their family are even more at risk. In an experiment in a high school, which lasted for 8 to 12 weeks, the students were told to be a movie director and to choose their own story structure. The students worked with each other, which involved lots of different skills and social interactivity. The movies they had made were actually cool. Then, the researchers tested the intervention effect, finding this can improve their self-regulation, and they found this can improve their self-regulation and critical thinking skills. Today, poems remain an important part of art and culture. We often talk about the knowledge about the literature in poem. Poetry is probably the oldest form of literature, and probably predates the origin of writing itself. The oldest written manuscripts we have are poems, mostly epic poems telling the stories of ancient mythology. The English language in poems and poetries is difficult to understand, often giving readers a feeling of frustration and making it hard for readers to enjoy poetry. This is because poems use literary expressions. Poetry was once written according to fairly strict rules of meter and rhyme, and each culture had its own rules. Some poems incorporate rhyme schemes, with 2 or more lines that end in like-sounding words. We should learn to simply enjoy it, and to know more about literature knowledge. The United States is considered the biggest food-wasting country in the world. Consumers collectively throw away more than all the retailers together in the U.S. In total, private U.S. households waste around 43% of all food. According to Save the Food, a national public service campaign, this could translate into an annual financial loss of $1,500 for a family of 4. In fact, over 40 million tons, 36 million tons, of food ends up in landfills every year, worth more than $161 billion. 60% of food waste comes from general consumption. There are 2 main sources of food waste. The majority of food waste comes from supermarkets, especially in the used by section. The other factor is what people purchase and how they eat, so purchasing all items is not a good idea. Avoiding food waste efficiently along the supply chain and in all our households can result in a win-win scenario. Having food waste could help meet the demand for nutrition of our growing population, and equally minimize the negative environmental effects of agriculture. A leader can define or clarify goals by issuing a memo or an executive order, a edict or a fatwa or a tweet, by passing a law, barking a command, or presenting an interesting idea in a meeting of colleagues. Leaders can mobilize people's energies in ways that range from subtle, quiet persuasion to the coercive threat or the use of deadly force. Sometimes a charismatic leader such as Martin Luther King Jr. can define goals and mobilize energies through rhetoric and the power of example. We can think of leadership as a spectrum, in terms of both visibility and the power the leader wields. On one end of the spectrum, we have the most visible, authoritative leaders like the President of the United States or the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, or a dictator such as Hitler or Gaddafi. At the opposite end of the spectrum is casual, low-key leadership found in countless situations every day around the world, leadership that can make a significant difference to the individuals whose lives are touched by it. Over the centuries, the first kind, the out-in-front, authoritative leadership, has generally been exhibited by men. Some men in positions of great authority, including Nelson Mandela, have chosen a strategy of leading from behind. More often, however, top leaders have been quite visible in their exercise of power. Women, as well as some men, have provided casual, low-key leadership behind the scenes. But this pattern has been changing, as more women have taken up opportunities for visible, authoritative leadership. The ocean provides habitats for 98% of fish, the source of protein feeding 4.8 billion of people. But human activities and climate change have left corals bleached in some oceans. There are many species of fish that are endangered. The government set up a network, called MPA Marine Campaign, in which countries and organizations have been collaborating with each other to protect the environment for 32 years. A marine protected area, MPA, is a zone designated and managed to protect marine habitats and species for the good of the ocean, society, economy, and culture. Within MPAs, human activities such as fishing, vessel traffic, and tourism are regulated. MPAs can come in the form of a fully protected marine reserve, a moderately protected marine park, or a no-take zone among others. But MPA is faced with lots of challenges, as some developing countries lack management and resources, and feel excluded. Today, this course you are going to take is about what is engineering and how to work with a complicated system. You guys should know the answers, because all of you guys are from the engineering course. Especially, when you design, build, debug and develop something new, during these process, you are working with the complicated system. How to program complicated systems, and how would you know it actually works before producing it? Sometimes, the inspirations are from your daily life. You probably need to consider your personal life experience, and from the common everyday life to the tiny things that you cannot see virtually, and the inspirations normally exist in the tiny levels. A complicated system such as your laptops running Microsoft systems. That means the system is not able to see, which means you guys have to virtualize it. Engineering is here to help virtualize by using systems. Nowadays, the complicated systems are relatively reliable, and you guys work upon these and need to deliver the new outcomes which are reliable as well. This is what we do now, and we are good at. Engineering is to help virtualize by using systems. In order to develop and produce a reliable system, you need to consider more on the risks, potentials, predictability, and accuracy. The stock market is where investors connect to buy and sell investments, most commonly, stocks, which are shares of ownership in a public company. When you need groceries, you go to the supermarket. When you're ready to buy stocks or mutual funds, you'll usually buy them online through the stock market, which anyone can access with a brokerage account or employee retirement plan. The term stock market often refers to one of the major stock market indexes. However, there are some different uses of the stock market before and after. In the 18th century, manufacturing companies came into the market. Traditional companies used stocks to raise money and input money into companies, while modern companies used stocks to output money. From 19th to 20th century, however, modern companies, such as Apple, Google and Microsoft are big enough to earn money and use stocks differently. The stock market also inclined to put money into big companies. The question today of what makes a luxury brand, and how do we distinguish it, is very hard to answer. The standard business response is to say they are more exclusive. And we get exclusivity by having high price and relatively small amounts of the product available. The reality, however, of luxury brands is that they are sold in their millions, and in some cases, are not priced that much higher than the standard output. The only way I can really answer your question is to say, it is all relative. As you said in your introduction, it wasn't that long ago in Australia that we would have considered 2 televisions to be a luxury, or even further back, 1 color television. And you can make a strong argument, for example, that Starbucks in China, right now, is a luxury purchase because of its cost, because of how frequently it is purchased by many people. So, I think the long answer is a complicated one, but the answer is, it depends who you talk to. I think in the business community what we would say is that there is a small cluster of more expensive brands which have a distinct strategy that we would identify as being luxury brands. And they start with the Rolls-Royce and the Tiffany's and the Louis Vuittons of the world. Rejection happens to all of us, and it can be a disappointing experience. I will now give some advice for young researchers. Many things have changed today, which can be a troubling issue. The chance of getting a paper published is becoming smaller and smaller. Although it never is easy to take, rejection is particularly hard at the beginning of your career. But rejections will lead to a better result and will be good for the career path. Use this feedback to improve your paper for submission to another journal as well as your next, more robust study of the topic. Usually several individuals with expertise in the topic have donated substantial time to provide detailed advice to advance your paper and future work. Also remember that publication does not mean funding. Investors will learn how to attract and engage young researchers at the same time. We are living through one of the greatest of scientific endeavors, the attempt to understand the most complex object in the universe, the brain. Scientists are accumulating vast amounts of data about structure and function in a huge array of brains, from the tiniest to our own. Tens of thousands of researchers are devoting massive amounts of time and energy to thinking about what brains do, and astonishing new technology, including computers and artificial intelligence, is enabling us to both describe and manipulate that activity. Humans can tell computers what to do and how to do, by giving them the meaning of the certain words. Computers can operate as programmed, and develop systems and symbols. Computers work by analyzing messages into bytes, and this function is similar to human brains. Both human brains and computers are symbol processors, so computers have potential to bring artificial intelligence. The first inhabitants in Australia were the ancestors of the present Indigenous people. Whether these first migrations involved one or several successive waves and distinct peoples is still subject to academic debate, as is its timing. The minimum widely accepted timeframe places presence of humans in Australia at 40,000 to 43,000 years before present, while the upper ranges supported by others is 60,000 to 70,000 years BP. In any event, this migration was achieved during the closing stages of the Pleistocene epoch, when sea levels were typically much lower than they are today. Repeated episodes of extended glaciation resulted in decreases of sea levels by some 100-150 m. The continental coastline therefore extended much further out into the Timor Sea than it does today, and Australia and New Guinea formed a single landmass, known as Sahul, connected by an extensive land bridge across the Arafura Sea, Gulf of Carpentaria, and Torres Strait. The ancestral Australian Aboriginal peoples were thus long established and continued to develop, diversify, and settle through much of the continent. As these sea levels again rose at the terminus of the most recent glacial period, some 10,000 years ago, the Australian continent once more became a separated landmass. However, the newly formed 150 kilometers wide Torres Strait with its chain of islands still provided the means for cultural contact and trade between New Guinea and the northern Cape York Peninsula. During the 1970s and 1980s, around 120,000 Southern Asian refugees migrated to Australia. During that 20 years, Australia first began to adopt a policy of what Minister of Immigration Al Grassby termed multiculturalism. In 2004 to 2005, Australia accepted 123,000 new settlers, a 40% increase over the past 10 years. The largest number of immigrants, 40,000 in 2004 to 2005, moved to Sydney. The majority of immigrants came from Asia, led by China and India. Current studies show that what goes on labels is an important consideration for manufacturers since more than 70% of shoppers read food labels when considering whether to buy a product. A recent controversy as to whether labels on prepared foods should educate or merely inform the consumer is over, and a consumer group got its way. The group maintained that the product labels should do more than simply list how many grams of nutrients food contains. Their contention was that labels should also list the percentage of a day's total nutrients that the product would supply to the consumer, because this information is essential in planning a healthy diet. A government agency disagrees, strongly favoring a label that merely informs the consumer. In other words, a label that only lists the contents of the product. The agency maintained that consumers could decide for themselves if the food is nutritious and is meeting their daily needs. The consumer group in supporting its case has cited a survey in which shoppers were shown a food label and with an ask if they would need more or less of a certain nutrient after eating a serving of this product. The shoppers weren't able to answer the questions easily when they were not given a specific percentage. This study and others helped get the new regulation passed, and now food products must have more detailed labels. The most notorious carrier of typhoid fever, but by no means the most destructive, was Mary Mallon, also known as Typhoid Mary. In 1907, she became the first carrier in the United States to be identified and traced. She was a cook in New York who was closely associated with 53 cases and 3 deaths. Public health authorities told Mary to give up working as a cook or have her gallbladder removed, as she had a chronic infection that kept her active as a carrier of the disease. Mary quit her job but returned later under a false name. She was detained and quarantined after another typhoid outbreak. She died of pneumonia after 26 years in quarantine. Mary Mallon, born in 1869 and migrated to America from Ireland. She was an excellent cook. She got along well with her colleagues and friends, though sometimes she felt bored with her boss. She was proud and satisfied with her life. But she was transmitted with typhoid, a disease that transmitted by food and water. Though she always denied she was sick, 22 people were infected by her and one of them died. Mary Mallon, September 23, 1869 to November 11, 1938, better known as Typhoid Mary, was the first person in the United States identified as an asymptomatic carrier of the pathogen associated with typhoid fever. She was presumed to have infected 22 people, 3 of whom died, over the course of her career as a cook. She was twice forcibly isolated by public health authorities and died after a total of nearly 3 decades in isolation. Mars is the 4th planet from the Sun and the 2nd smallest planet in the solar system after Mercury, named after the Roman god of the war. It is often referred to as a red planet because the iron oxide prevalent on its surface gives it a reddish appearance. Mars is a terrestrial planet with a thin atmosphere, having surface features reminiscent both of the impact crater of the Moon, and the volcanoes, valleys, deserts, and polar ice caps of the Earth. The rotational period and the seasonal cycles of the Mars are likewise similar of those of Earth, as it was the tilt that produces these seasons. Mars is the site of the Olympus Mons, the largest volcano and the second largest known mountain in the solar system, and the Valles Marineris, one of the largest canyons in the solar system. Until the first successful Mars flyby in 1965 by Mariner 4, many speculated about the presence of the liquid water on the planet's surface. This was based on observed periodic variation in the light and the dark patches, particularly in the polar latitude, which appeared to be seas and continents. Geological evidence gathered by the unmanned missions suggested that Mars once had large scale of water coverage on the surface on some earlier stages existence. So happiness economics can help us get to these questions, and I'll try to give you some examples of this. Now, even though there's a lot of skepticism, originally about using this surveys what people say make them happy. The number of reasons that we are getting increasingly confident in doing so. One is that there's a consistent pattern, remarkable consistent pattern, determines well-being across large samples of people, across countries, across the world, and over time. Some of the basic things that make people happy, and I will show you some of these: income, health, marital status, employment status. Some of these very basic things are remarkably consistent across countries, across world. So that gives us some sense that these surveys are picking up consistent patterns. And when we know what consistent patterns are, we can look how other things that very much more affect people's well-being. The environment and equality, then nature's institution raging on living, and all kinds of other things that very much more. Today, we will discuss the two main origins of concepts of political ideology. There are the terms that left and right appeared during the French Revolution of the 18th century, when members of the National Assembly divided into the supportive of the king to the president's right and supportive of the revolution to his left. However, the left and right wing became conceptualized since the French Revolution. The left side of the speaker podium in the assembly became the political left wing. This left wing is aggressive in nature. On the other hand, the right side of the speaker podium became conservative, which is the part of old regime. I think we are in the early stages of a change toward much more human freedom in business. And I think this change may be as important for businesses as the change to democracy has been for governments. The reason I think that's happening is because it's now possible for the first time in human history to have the economic benefits of very large organizations. Things like economies of scale and knowledge, and at the same time to have the human benefits of small organizations. Things like freedom, flexibility, creativity, and motivation. The reason I think that's possible is because information technology has now reduced the cost of communication to such a low level that it's now possible for huge numbers of people, even in very large organizations, to have enough information to make sensible decisions for themselves instead of just following orders from someone above them who supposedly knows more than they do in a management hierarchy. English, as you have already read, is not a pure language. I don't think there really are any pure languages in the world. But English is definitely not a pure language. English, in fact, has borrowed from over 350 languages in its history. So it's a variety of many languages. Some people say it's like a dog, a mongrel dog, a dog that has been made up of many different dogs. The English language is like that. By looking at the history of the English language, we learn about the history of the English people. The two things are closely connected. So, in fact, today we are not only learning about language, but we are learning about history. The fact that English has borrowed words from over 350 languages has been viewed differently throughout history. So for example, in Shakespeare's time people were very angry about words which were not, they thought, original English words, words which came from other languages, they didn't like them. Since the discovery of DNA structure, people have believed that genes have an impact only on people's physical structure. However, the study of mapping of genes in 2001 found that there is a genetic responsibility to humans' physical and psychological behaviors, which has changed the way we understand our behaviors. Findings from behavioral genetic research have broadly impacted modern understanding of the role of genetic and environmental influences on behavior. The research on genes has provided integrating information, and the findings can benefit biologists, psychologists, and neuroscientists. Qualitative research has fostered arguments that behavioral genetics is an ungovernable field without scientific norms or consensus, which fosters controversy. So the topic for today is abstraction. And this is a very important layer of computer because you can't do anything with a computer unless you have a symbolic system in place. Right. So we're talking about the origin of symbolic systems. Language is a classic symbolic system. Apparently one theory for why language evolved is that people communicated with sign language and with movement quite well for a long time. And it turned out that they wanted to communicate even while they were doing things. So, while they were trying to strangle the dinosaur, not the dinosaurs, the rhinoceros, they wanted to say, "Come help me," and they used sign language to do it. They had to let go of the rhinoceros, and the rhinoceros ran away. So you can see that it's a good idea to be able to do something with your hands, and be able to communicate at the same time. Hence there come words and languages.